they're battling each other. You gotta look back at it when time passes and you look and you say, you've said things that agitated each other to the point that you might have wanted to run into each other.
50 Cent just leaked new evidence about Tupac and Biggie's murders, and it completely flips the story we thought we knew. His Netflix series digs into gang alliances, industry pressure, never-seen police audio from Keith D, and insiders claiming the East-West feud was actually a proxy war with real money behind it. And once those hidden recordings surface, the murders stop looking like random street hits and start looking orchestrated. The revelation. What if I told you that after nearly 3 decades of silence, mysteries, and unanswered questions, one of hip-hop's most powerful voices has decided to pull back the curtain on 2 of the most infamous unsolved murders in music history? That's right, we're talking about Curtis 50 Cent Jackson, and he's not holding anything back. On December 2nd, 2025, 50 Cent released a bombshell Netflix docuseries that's sending shockwaves through the hip-hop community and beyond as it dives deep into the murders of Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G., 2 titans whose lives were cut devastatingly short in the prime of their careers. It's been 28 years since Christopher Wallace, known to the world as Biggie Smalls or the notorious B.I.G., was gunned down in Los Angeles on March 9th, 1997. And just 6 months before that tragic night, on September 13th, 1996, Tupac Shakur, the poetic revolutionary, the voice of a generation, died from wounds sustained in a Las Vegas drive-by shooting. These weren't just rappers, these were cultural icons, voices that spoke for millions, artists whose influence transcended music and touched every corner of society. For literally decades, and I mean decades, fans have been in the comments, the Reddit threads, the Discord servers, the group chats, anywhere and everywhere, trying to figure out what actually went down on those nights. Who was the shooter? Was it gang-related? Or was there some industry executive puppet master pulling strings behind the scenes? The theories have been absolutely wild, the speculation has been non-stop, and the truth has been more elusive than getting verified on Twitter, until right now. Enter 50 Cent, executive producer extraordinaire, who has never been one to shy away from controversy or difficult conversations. Through his multi-part Netflix series, he's compiled testimonies from former music industry insiders, archival materials that have never seen the light of day, and audio recordings that paint a chilling picture of what transpired during that volatile period in hip-hop history. This isn't just another documentary rehashing old news. This is a deep, unflinching examination that features people who were actually there, who witnessed events firsthand, and who are now, finally, ready to speak their truth. The docuseries doesn't waste any time getting into the meat of the matter. In episode 2, which focuses specifically on the murders, we're introduced to a narrative that's been whispered about in back rooms and speculated about in countless articles, but never quite laid out with this level of detail and conviction. The series presents testimonies from Kirk Burroughs, a label co-founder, Mark Curry, a rapper who was signed to Bad Boy Records, and Roxanne Johnson, the ex-wife of Craig Mack. These aren't outsiders looking in. These are people who were embedded in the industry, who saw the machinery at work, who understood the pressures, the rivalries, and the dangerous games being played. One of the most striking elements that the documentary explores is how the rivalries between East Coast and West Coast labels escalated into something far more sinister, a proxy war involving actual street gangs. We're talking about the Crips allegedly aligning with East Coast interests and the Bloods with the West Coast. This wasn't just a rap beef playing out in diss tracks and magazine interviews. This was real-world violence with real-world consequences, and the documentary argues persuasively that these gang affiliations played a crucial role in both deaths. Kirk Burroughs, reflecting with the wisdom and perspective that comes with age and distance from those turbulent times, makes a particularly haunting observation in the series. He suggests that with mature reflection, it becomes clear there was orchestration behind Tupac's death. He describes how, after Tupac's shooting in Las Vegas, there were significant pressures within the industry to continue business as usual, to keep promoting albums, to keep the money machine running. Specifically, he recounts how Biggie was pushed, some might even say coerced, to travel to Los Angeles to promote his album Life After Death, despite the obvious and present dangers that existed in what was essentially enemy territory at the height of the coastal tension.
Well, I got the Life After Death double CD dropping March 25th.
Let that sink in for a second. Biggie, according to multiple people interviewed in the documentary, didn't want to go to LA. He understood the assignment. He knew the vibes were off. He knew the situation was dangerous. He wasn't out here being reckless, but the industry, the label, the promotional schedule, all of those business concerns overrode basic safety protocols. Burroughs' testimony in the series literally argues that Biggie was ushered to his death, that the industry's obsession with profit margins and streaming numbers, well, album album sales back then, created the perfect storm that made that tragic night in Los Angeles inevitable. But here's where things get even more intense, even more concrete. The docuseries doesn't just rely on reflections and analysis from industry insiders. It presents what it frames as hard evidence, specifically audio recordings from Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, a member of the Southside Crips who was arrested in 2023 and is currently awaiting trial for Tupac's murder. This audio, recorded during a 2008 proffer session with police, essentially a protected interview where suspects can speak somewhat freely in exchange for immunity, provides a chilling first-person account of the night Tupac was shot.
I do move in silence.
In these recordings, which have now become central evidence in Davis's murder case, he describes in vivid detail what happened on September 7th, 1996. He talks about how, earlier that evening, there had been a physical altercation at the MGM Grand Casino. Tupac and members of his entourage, including Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight, had gotten into a violent confrontation with Orlando Anderson, who happened to be Keefe D's nephew. This wasn't a random beef. Anderson was allegedly involved in an earlier robbery of a Death Row affiliate, and when Tupac spotted him at the casino, things escalated quickly and violently.
No. You're back at your own hotel.
We're at the Luxor.
What Davis describes next is the anatomy of a revenge killing. He details how, after the MGM Grand incident, he and his crew, including Anderson, DeAndre, Big Dre Smith, and driver Terrence T. Brown, armed themselves and went looking for retaliation. They initially positioned themselves at Club 662, where Tupac was scheduled to perform that night, waiting with weapons for an opportunity that never came. After about 90 minutes of waiting, they left for a liquor store, and that's when fate intervened in the cruelest way possible. They spotted Tupac's black BMW, with the rapper visibly hanging out the passenger window, larger than life, full of energy and charisma. Davis describes executing a U-turn to pull alongside the vehicle at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Koval Lane. And here's where his account becomes particularly specific and damning. From the front passenger seat, Davis admits to pulling out a .40 caliber Glock and passing it toward the back seat. According to his own words, Anderson said, "Give it here, I'll shoot," before allegedly firing multiple rounds at the BMW.
It's a strong dude, yo. I know Duke, you know what I'm saying?
Very
He's
strong.
real strong. So when it was like he got shot, I was just more like, again? You know what I'm saying? He always getting shot or shot at. He gonna pull through this one again, make a few records about it, and it's gonna be over, you know what I'm saying? But when he died, I was just like, whoa.
Tupac was struck 4 times, twice in the chest with one bullet piercing his lung, once in the arm, and once in the thigh. Suge Knight, who was driving, sustained a graze wound to the head. The Cadillac sped away into the night, and 6 days later, on September 13th, 1996, Tupac Shakur died from respiratory failure and cardiac arrest. The voice was silenced. The revolution was cut short, and hip-hop would never be the same. Now, Davis claims in his audio confession that this hit was tied to a bounty, that there was money on the table for taking out both Tupac and Suge Knight. He states that only half the promised payment was received since Knight survived the attack. This allegation alone raises profound questions about who might have funded such a bounty, who had the motive and means to put a price on these men's heads, and whether this violence was orchestrated at levels far beyond street-level gang disputes. The documentary makes clear that this wasn't just random gang violence. This was calculated. This was planned. And according to the testimonies and evidence presented, this was part of a larger pattern of escalating violence that had its roots in industry rivalries, territorial disputes, and the toxic mixture of ego, money, and power that defined that era of hip-hop. The series argues compellingly that what started as artistic competition and label rivalry evolved into something far more dangerous, a situation where actual lives were on the line, where real bullets were being fired, and where the consequences were irrevocable and devastating. The night everything changed. Let's rewind and really examine what happened on that fateful night in Las Vegas, because understanding the sequence of events is crucial to comprehending how a night that should have been a celebration turned into one of the darkest moments in music history. September 7th, 1996 started out as what many thought would be an incredible evening. Mike Tyson, the baddest man on the planet, was fighting Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand. It was a heavyweight championship bout, the kind of event that draws celebrities, high rollers, anyone who wants to be part of something big. Tupac Shakur attended the fight with Suge Knight and members of the Outlaws, his rap group comprised of childhood friends and family members who were fiercely loyal to him. The fight itself was anticlimactic. Tyson won in just 109 seconds of the first round, but what happened after would change everything. As Tupac and his entourage were making their way through the MGM Grand's casino lobby, Trevon Trey Lane, a member of the mob Piru Bloods affiliated with Death Row Records, spotted Orlando Anderson. Now, this wasn't just a random sighting. Earlier in the year. Anderson, a Southside Compton Crip, had allegedly been involved in an altercation at a Foot Locker in Lakewood, California, where he and others had robbed Lane of a gold death row medallion. This robbery had escalated tensions between the Crips and Bloods factions that were tied, whether directly or peripherally, to the hip-hop industry. When Lane pointed out Anderson to Tupac, indicating this was the guy who had disrespected Death Row, Tupac's response was immediate and violent. Surveillance footage from the MGM Grand, which has been analyzed exhaustively in documentaries and investigations, shows Tupac landing the first punch, knocking Anderson to the ground. Suge Knight and others from Tupac's crew quickly joined in, and for a brief but intense moment, Anderson was on the receiving end of a brutal beatdown. Security eventually broke it up, and both parties went their separate ways. But here's the thing about street code, about gang culture, about that world where respect is everything and disrespect demands response. This public humiliation of Anderson wasn't going to go unanswered.
Directly behind you.
Yeah. Because Frank was driving.
What many people don't realize, what the documentary makes abundantly clear, is how quickly the response was mobilized. According to Keith D's account, which he's provided in multiple forums, the 2008 police proffer, his 2019 memoir, Compton Street Legend, various media interviews, and grand jury testimonies, the retaliation was planned almost immediately after news of the MGM incident reached him and his crew. This wasn't something they deliberated about for days or weeks. This was, our guy got jumped, we need to handle this. Right now, tonight.
How could I move inside of you? You making it loud, Greg Caden making it loud, everybody making it loud.
Idi Amin, one of the members of the Outlaws who was actually there that night, driving in the car directly behind Tupac's BMW, provides a perspective in various interviews that's both illuminating and heartbreaking. He describes the atmosphere, the energy, the sense that this was supposed to be just another night in the life. They were heading to Club 662, where Tupac was scheduled to perform, where the party was going to continue into the early morning hours. There was excitement in the air, that electric feeling you get when you're young, successful, and seemingly invincible. But there were also warning signs that, in retrospect, should have been heeded. Idi Amin recounts how Yaki Gaddafi, one of the Outlaws members who would himself be murdered just 2 months later in an unrelated shooting, asked their security Frank Alexander a crucial question as they were driving. You got your gun, right? And when Frank responded that he didn't, that there had been warnings from Las Vegas police about anyone caught with weapons facing arrest, Gaddafi became agitated. He understood, perhaps better than anyone else in that moment, how vulnerable they were.
What went through your head when you saw that?
They shoot my. That's, you know what I mean? They shoot, that's what we saying. Like, yo, they shooting the car. They shoot, you know, we telling Frank, like, yo, what the you know what I mean? It's going down.
This is one of the tragic ironies of that night. Here you had the biggest rapper in the world riding through Las Vegas with inadequate security, without the protection that someone in his position and with his level of exposure desperately needed. Why? Because of legal concerns, because of warnings from local police, because of a series of decisions that individually might have seemed reasonable, but collectively created a perfect storm of vulnerability. Meanwhile, according to Keith D's account, his crew was moving with purpose and intent. They had armed themselves, specifically with that .40 caliber Glock that would become the murder weapon. They initially set up at Club 662, waiting in the parking lot, eyes scanning for their target. But after about 90 minutes with no sign of Tupac, they decided to leave, heading toward a liquor store. And that's when, by pure chance or cruel fate, depending on how you look at it, they spotted the black BMW with Tupac clearly visible, his energy and charisma evident even from a distance. What happened next has been described by Davis in graphic detail. The U-turn to position their white Cadillac alongside Tupac's vehicle, the passing of the gun toward the back seat, and the eruption of gunfire that shattered the Las Vegas night. EDI. Mean describes seeing an arm extend from the back of the Cadillac and watching in horror as shots rang out. He and the other Outlaws members in the trailing vehicle were caught completely off guard, essentially sitting ducks, unable to respond or protect their friend and leader.
So that's the look on everybody's face. You know what I mean?
Did you have a gun on you?
Nobody had guns.
Nobody had guns.
The BMW, now riddled with bullets, veered and eventually came to a stop. Suge Knight, despite being grazed himself, would later drive Tupac toward the hospital before police and paramedics took over. Tupac was rushed to University Medical Center, where doctors fought to save his life, performing multiple surgeries to repair the damage to his lungs and other organs. For 6 days, the world held its breath, hoping for a miracle. But the injuries were too severe, the damage too extensive. On September 13, 1996, at 4:03 p.m., Tupac Amaru Shakur was pronounced dead. He was just 25 years old. He left behind a legacy that would only grow larger with time, a catalog of music that would influence generations, and a void in hip-hop that has never truly been filled. The streets mourned, fans around the world wept, and in the industry, there was a collective sense of shock mixed with an underlying current of fear. If someone as big and seemingly protected as Tupac could be gunned down, who was safe? But the violence wasn't over. The documentary makes a compelling argument that Biggie's murder 6 months later was not coincidental, but rather a direct consequence of the escalating cycle of retaliation. On March 9, 1997, Biggie was in Los Angeles for the Soul Train Music Awards after party. Despite warnings from friends and associates, despite the obvious tensions that still existed between the coasts, despite everything that had happened to Tupac, promotional pressures for his album Life After Death brought him to what many considered hostile territory. That night, as Biggie left the Peterson Automotive Museum and climbed into his GMC Suburban, a dark-colored Chevrolet Impala pulled up alongside his vehicle. A shooter, whose identity remains officially unknown to this day, fired multiple shots. Biggie was hit 4 times, with the fatal bullet piercing his heart and other vital organs. He was pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center at 1:15 a.m. He was 24 years old. The docuseries presents never-before-seen grainy footage of Biggie's shooting scene, broadcast for the first time, showing the chaotic aftermath, the emergency response, the confusion, the horror of another young black icon cut down in his prime. It includes archival clips of Valletta Wallace, Biggie's mother, expressing her belief that her son was killed as part of the ongoing war between key industry players, caught in the crossfire of beefs and rivalries that had spiraled completely out of control. What the documentary argues, what multiple testimonies suggest, is that these weren't random acts of violence. These were orchestrated hits, part of a larger pattern of retaliation and proxy warfare, where the actual combatants weren't just street-level gang members, but potentially included people with significant financial resources and industry connections who had the means and motive to fund violence. The series doesn't definitively prove who pulled all the strings, but it lays out a compelling narrative that makes it impossible to view these deaths as simple, isolated incidents of gang violence. The unresolved mystery. Now here's where things get really complicated, really controversial, and really frustrating for anyone who's been following these cases for the past 3 decades. Despite all the evidence, despite confessions like Keith D's, despite testimonies from witnesses, despite decades of investigation by multiple law enforcement agencies, Biggie's murder remains completely unsolved, and Tupac's case only saw its first arrest in 2023, 27 years after his death. Think about that for a moment. These were 2 of the most high-profile murders in American entertainment history. These weren't nobodies. These were cultural icons whose deaths made international headlines. And yet, for nearly 3 decades, no one was held accountable. How is that possible? What does that say about our justice system? What does it reveal about the complications, the obstructions, and the failures that have characterized these investigations from the very beginning? The documentary digs into the investigative challenges that have plagued both cases from day one. In Tupac's case, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department faced immediate obstacles. Witnesses from Tupac's entourage were understandably reluctant to cooperate fully with authorities. There's a street code, a cultural understanding in certain communities that you don't talk to police, that you handle your business your own way. Whether you agree with that code or not, it's a reality that investigators had to navigate. Beyond the cultural barriers, there were practical investigative failures. Key leads weren't pursued aggressively enough. The MGM Grand Altercation, which in retrospect was clearly the catalyst for the shooting, wasn't immediately connected to the murder in a way that might have led to quicker identification of suspects. Witness accounts of the white Cadillac getaway vehicle weren't acted upon with the urgency they deserved, and tragically, some witnesses, like Yaki Gaddafi, who was in the car directly behind Tupac and could have provided crucial testimony, were killed before they could give complete statements to investigators. For Biggie's case, the complications were even more profound and disturbing. The Los Angeles Police Department's investigation was severely compromised by the Rampart scandal, which exposed widespread corruption within the department involving officers who allegedly moonlighted for Death Row Records and had connections to gang members. There were allegations, never proven definitively, but also never fully dispelled, that corrupt cops may have been involved in, or at least had knowledge about Biggie's murder. Retired Detective Russell Poole spent years pursuing theories that Suge Knight orchestrated Biggie's murder as retaliation for Tupac's death, using corrupt LAPD officers and a hitman named Amir Muhammad. His work, detailed in the 2002 book Labyrinth, painted a picture of institutional rot and deliberate obstruction of justice. A later 2006 reinvestigation by Detective Greg Cadding implicated Wardell Poochie Faust, a Bloods affiliate, as the actual shooter, allegedly hired by Knight through an intermediary. But Faust was murdered himself in 2003, taking whatever knowledge he had to his grave. The documentary doesn't shy away from the conspiracy theories that have proliferated over the years. There have been persistent allegations linking Sean Diddy Combs to both murders, particularly in relation to the Tupac shooting. Keith D himself has claimed in various interviews that Diddy offered significant money. He's mentioned figures as high as $1 million for a hit on Tupac and Suge Knight. However, it's crucial to note that Las Vegas authorities have explicitly stated that Diddy is not a suspect in their investigation, and he has consistently denied any involvement in either murder. This is where public opinion gets really divided, where social media explodes with passionate debates, and where the documentary itself has faced criticism. Some viewers have praised 50 Cent for compiling these accounts and bringing renewed attention to cases that many felt had been swept under the rug. Posts on social media platform X have described the series as a must-watch, as one of the most fully realized portraits of industry pathology, as something that finally connects the dots on both murders. But there's also been significant backlash. Critics have labeled the series as a hit piece, arguing that it lacks balance and focuses on sensationalism without providing concrete new proof beyond testimonies that have been available for years. Biggie's estate has issued statements calling certain claims in the documentary pathological lies, specifically refuting allegations about funeral expenses and other financial details. Lauren LaRosa, speaking to sources close to the Wallace family, has echoed these denials in various interviews. There's also criticism about what the documentary allegedly omits. Some viewers have pointed out that figures like Jimmy Henchman, who was allegedly involved in the 1994 Quad Studios robbery that preceded Tupac's shift to death row and fueled his paranoia about East Coast rivals, aren't given adequate attention. The argument is that by focusing narrowly on certain narratives and certain suspects, the documentary potentially obscures other important aspects of these complex cases. Netflix has defended the series, stating that it's a compilation of available sources and testimonies meant to shine light on events that have been shrouded in mystery for too long. But even the network acknowledges that much of what's presented remains speculative, that the evidence is largely testimonial rather than forensic, and that viewers should interpret the content with critical thinking and awareness of its limitations. And here's the really frustrating part. Even with Keith D's arrest and pending trial, there's no guarantee of closure. His trial has been delayed multiple times, most recently pushed to February 9th, 2026, due to new evidence, witness availability issues, and various legal complications. Davis has pleaded not guilty and, in recent statements, has claimed that some of his earlier confessions were exaggerated, that he was trying to sell books and get attention, that he wasn't even in Las Vegas on the night in question. The case that once seemed straightforward based on his own admissions has become murky again. For Biggie's case, there's even less progress. Despite multiple investigations over 25 years, despite wrongful death lawsuits filed by his family in 2002 and 2007 that accused the LAPD of cover-ups and connections to Suge Knight, despite countless hours of detective work and journalistic investigation, officially, the case remains unsolved. The murders of key suspects and witnesses, the deaths of people who might have provided crucial testimony, and the sheer passage of time have eroded leads and made the prospect of justice increasingly remote. What does this all mean? What are we supposed to take away from 50 Cent's documentary, from these testimonies, from decades of investigation that have yielded so little in terms of actual accountability? I think there are several lessons here, several truths that we need to confront as we think about these cases and their broader implications. First, these murders represent systemic failures, failures of law enforcement, failures of the entertainment industry, failures of the systems that should have protected these young black men, but instead allowed them to be placed in situations where violence became inevitable. The fact that Biggie was pressured to go to Los Angeles despite obvious dangers, that Tupac was riding through Vegas with inadequate security, that warning signs were ignored in favor of business considerations. These aren't just individual failures, but systemic ones that reflect how the industry valued profit over safety. Second, the unsolved nature of these cases speaks to deeper issues about how America treats violence in black communities, particularly when that violence intersects with celebrity and entertainment. Would these cases have remained unsolved if the victims had been white? Would the investigations have been more aggressive, more thorough, more committed to finding answers? These are uncomfortable questions, but they're necessary ones. Third, and perhaps most importantly, these murders and their aftermath demonstrate the destructive power of unchecked rivalry, ego, and the toxic mixture of fame, money, and street credibility. The East Coast-West Coast beef wasn't just media hype. It had real consequences. It created an environment environment where violence was normalized, where retaliation was expected, where young men felt they had to prove their toughness and loyalty, even when it meant risking everything. As we wait for Keefe D's trial in 2026, as we hope that maybe, finally, there will be some measure of justice for Tupac, we're left with the sobering reality that Biggie's case remains cold, that full accountability may never come, and that two of the most talented artists of their generation were lost to senseless violence that could have been prevented. Their music lives on, their influence continues to shape hip-hop and culture at large, but the men themselves, the real human beings behind the legends, are gone, and the questions about who's truly responsible for their deaths may never be fully answered. That wraps up this video. For more interesting videos like this, check out the cards on your screen.